Hello, hello. I'm in a mellow mood, by the way. The exercise today was fucking stoic. So, the script is today's script is lying for credibility. Even though you learned the lesson from someone else's story, people will only see it if it's reflected by personal experiences. All right. So let me go through it again and maybe grammatically work it. Lying for credibility. Point. Even though you learned the lesson from somebody else's story. And that's basically how my dad always used to say, like, a smart person basically learns from his mistake, but a smarter person learns from others' mistakes, right? So ultimately, like, throughout your experiences in the world, some of them are inherited. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a genetic thing, but ideally, you kind of like, it's just maybe inspiration. Maybe you don't notice how you're struggling, and then a conversation kind of like fills in the blanks. You kind of never know. That's why like kind of YouTube reels sometimes fill the point, and I have been creating a rule about that, but I can discuss it with you guys later. But so like even though you learned the lesson from somebody else's story, the people will only see it if it's reflected by personal experiences. So in a way, you're taking somebody else's story and making it yours. So there are two ways I have acted upon this. Here we go. Lying for credibility. Even though you learned the lesson from somebody else's story, people will only see it if it's reflected by personal experience. Now that I showed you the script. So there are two ways where I have technically not been fully honest when it comes to this. One, which is the simplest form, is ultimately you kind of learn the lesson and you apply your what you learned from the lesson from somebody else's story. And what you effectively do is you kind of have to revert to that story to justify your actions, even though your actions were correct and you've already went through this experience. But it's one of those moments where people that kind of like, how did you come up with that? Or how did you do this? And weirdly so, you have to create the narrative of which they understand they can trust a certain process. And my favorite way of doing this is always my grandfather always used to say, and my father, like these two people. I'd use my grandfather neutrally because like it's the archetype. So like when you kind of like have a thought in your head and you go like, no, my grandfather used to say that, or I did something with my grandfather once, which is probably not the case, but like he probably told me a story and I applied it on my own. So I use the experience, the story of the experience with them to add credibility to whatever it is I'm doing. And a lot of that actually happens in the business world, which is why like there's a separation between like actual professionals and hustlers. Like there's this like thing where like sometimes you're just being sold the words. You're not actually being sold the true. You're not being sold the actual like outcome. You're sold the words that you would want to hear. There are books around this, like how to sell. And funny enough, the people like my favorite book is uh, is by Robert Cialdini. I forgot the name of the book, but it's basically like it's the psychology behind like selling techniques, and he practically did another book which I still haven't read, but when the time comes that I'm actually like meeting with investors and everything like this, I will read that book. It helps when you're rephrasing words in order for people to understand your context from their perspective. But ultimately, like most of these books were written so people don't fall into the trap of being basically hustled because you're sold words, you're not actually sold action. But the only people who actually invest in these books are the people that are trying to hustle you. But so, anyways, going back to the story, uh, most of the times I attempt things without any experience, and what happens is I actually like do them based on certain research I did, based on certain, I don't know, like previous experiences that kind of fit, or just practically you read the documentation. But in the world that we live in, everyone kind of like wants, they want to see that side that makes sense. So the fact that I'm just capable is not enough. The fact that I've proven how capable I am in different fields, because I've done many things over the course of like the past 20 years, really doesn't matter. What matters is, were you able to accomplish this one thing that one time or once before and succeed in something like this? So one side of lying for credibility is basically just using somebody else's narrative as your own, because that's when you learned, but you're actually like, it's not really your own. But you use that in order for you to get in the actual, like, in the line of, give me the work, give me the job, or I can do this, trust me, fuck off, right? It's micromanagement kind of crap. But the second one, which is the one which is my favorite, which probably instigated this book, this script, is I sometimes figure shit out. And I have to tell people that I read it somewhere. Or I have to tell people that somebody that I trust told me, for them to kind of like create that relationship with it. I even have a book of multiple like quotes that come out of these like conversations. Sometimes I like, when I'm talking about it in a video, I kind of like write something down because like I feel like it's kind of like intense or profound. And maybe it's just my insecurity, or maybe it's just the fact that I have met enough people that lied about whatever it is they're talking about. Or just, like sometimes you're talking to people and they kind of like are, and that's the thing between believers and, I say believers and ignorance. Because like believers, in my personal opinion, is to believe something, you're basing it on your ignorance of it. And I'm not saying that to shame anyone, calm the fuck down. I'm saying that in order for you to believe something, there's the truth or the facts or whatever kind of like is tangibly acceptable by everyone else. And then there's something that you see, which is basically like you believe it can exist. For example, my vision, or you believe something exists like aliens or something like this, whatever. Most of them, like you've never seen one, or you can't show people one. So it becomes a belief in other people's perspective and a truth to you, maybe, or a belief to you that you kind of like want other people to believe in order for it to kind of become a unanimous thing. But so there are two kinds of people. There are people that are believers, and the other side, I think, are the ignorance, the people that accept their ignorance. So effectively, they become more and more. It's that Einstein quote, the one thing I know is I know nothing at all, right? It's like the minute you realize how much shit you can see, then you basically stop projecting your own kind of like your own mental framework on the world, and you start kind of like realizing how much you're ignorant about it. But that also opens the opportunity for you to kind of like be creative in every single way possible. There's no point for you to kind of like try to experiment in any way, and not try to experiment in any way. It's just like, go for it. Who the fuck knows? You don't know shit. You'll never know shit, and it doesn't matter what you do the next day. It'll probably change, or somebody will figure something better. So ultimately, it's just the mental approach of like always discovering. And I feel like I'm one of those ignorants, specifically because the, there are a lot of things that people teach that I have basically experimented with until I figured them out. And simple enough, like these kinds of videos allowed me to connect my trains of thoughts in ways that I never would. And then I'd read books and I go like, huh. I was like, it's funny because like this is how I actually structure things. So it becomes reading books that are documentations of how I think, but like they're written in a way where everyone can encompass, right? And so that's personally what's been my experience over the past 2 years. This note, just specifically, just maybe like calling me out and saying like, maybe have more faith in yourself. And maybe if you actually say something and you kind of like you 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 thought of it, it's yours, whether you learned it from someone else or not, you have like found a way to make it yours. Maybe I shouldn't hesitate. And I feel like everyone should consider this because most of the time our insecurities are only coming from us and effectively from the wrong environment. Because like if I'm talking to somebody about something and they kind of like look at me with that disbelief, it automatically triggers all this shit. And you go like, based on this and based on that and based on this and based on that, like you jump into facts. But the truth behind it is you either explain it differently for them to kind of like see your point of view, or you could just find the way to convince them that other people are actually like also in tune with that train of thoughts. Huh. You know, one one isolates me from the equation while the other one kind of like highlights my existence. It's a video. I love you guys.